Dialing in your handlebar and lever setup on your mountain bike is one of the best ways to get the most out of your bike and also to make it feel like it's fully customized just for you and the way that you ride. Not only that, but by getting the controls on your mountain bike set up just for you, you're going to have more control and comfort when you're out riding. And best of all, these are things that anybody can do from home. All you need is a couple Allen wrenches. It's quick, it's easy, and best of all, it's free. So I'm going to go through the process that I go through to set up the cockpit on every new bike that I ever get. And while we're doing that, I'm also going to talk about the reasons why and how it can benefit you depending on who you are, how you ride, what size you are, all those different things. So stick around. We're going to go through all those details right now. So first I'm going to talk about how I set up the handlebars on my mountain bike. But before we do that, a quick lesson in handlebar dimensions is important. The rise of a handlebar and the width of the handlebar are typically measured in millimeters, and they usually come in about 800 millimeter width. A lot of handlebars typically have about a 15 to a 40 millimeter rise, and the back sweep and up sweep of the handlebar are typically measured in degrees. The back sweep ranges from 7 to 9 degrees, sometimes a little bit more than that, and the up sweep typically ranges from about 4 to 5 degrees. So the first thing that I do every time I get a new bike or put new handlebars on a bike is I cut the handlebars down to the right width. And the reason this is important is because now modern mountain bikes come with handlebars that are at least 800 millimeters wide pretty much across the board. And typically that's too wide for most every normal sized human being unless you're like an NFL football player. The easiest way to visualize how the width of your handlebars impacts your strength and your control is to get in a push-up position and then try doing push-ups with your hands really close together as well as really far spread apart. Depending on the width of your shoulders, the length of your arms, and just your overall strength, everybody's going to have a little bit different width where they're at their strongest point. So what I'll do is I'll stick a tape measure or even a piece of tape down on the ground and I'll get in a comfortable push-up position. A lot of times I'll even close my eyes just so I'm not overthinking things. I'll lift my hands off the ground and then put them back on the ground and do a natural feeling push-up. And from that, I'll measure the width of where my hands were when I did that push-up. And I'll do that a few times and kind of get the average of those measurements because things will move around 4 to 5 millimeters each time. And then once you've done that and found kind of a good, happy ground for where you're at your strongest position, then I'll usually cut my handlebars down to maybe 5 or 10 millimeters wider than that to start. And the cool thing about aluminum handlebars especially is that you can take a hacksaw and cut through handlebars pretty easily. It doesn't take any special fancy tools. It's nice to get that cut nice and straight on the end of your handlebars. So either be very careful or get a hacksaw guide, or you can even use pipe cutters on aluminum handlebars. Or take your bike down to your local bike shop, tell them you want to cut your handlebars down to a certain width, and they should be able to do it really quick and easy. Now, once I've got the width of my handlebars set up just right, that's when I like to focus on getting the height of my handlebars set up. There's a few ways to do this. The easiest way is obviously by adjusting your stem spacers, and this is a pretty easy process. All you have to do is loosen your 2 stem bolts, remove your top cap, and move those spacers around accordingly if you want to raise or lower your handlebars. Then throw your top cap back on, get it nice and snug, not too tight that it binds up your headset, but snug enough that everything is tight. And then tighten down your stem bolts again and you're good to go. The other option is to get a handlebar with a higher rise, but of course, this obviously means you need to buy a new handlebar. So if you can avoid it, use your stem spacers. But if you feel like you really need a higher position or a lower position, that's when you might have to consider getting a handlebar that has more or less rise. Once I've got my handlebars cut down to the right width and I feel like I've got the position about right, that's when I really like to focus on the roll of my handlebars. The roll of your handlebars is super important because it really dictates your arm and elbow positioning, which has a huge influence on your strength and control when you're riding. Now, this is one of those setups that everybody has a little bit different preference on what works well for them. But for me, what I like to do is get my handlebars centered in the stem, have those stem bolts snug but loose enough that your bars can still be rolled. And then I like to get my handlebars into a nearly flat position, and then I roll them just slightly forward from there. And that seems to be what works well for me. Then I have slight up sweep to my handlebars and a nice, comfortable back sweep. So once I feel like I've got my handlebars in just the right position, that's when I start focusing on my lever position. And the first thing that I do is focus on the inboard positioning of my lever. Grab the grip, and I like to put my index finger on the brake lever and move that lever inboard as far as I can with a comfortable position of getting my index finger on the outermost portion of that lever. And the reason I do this is because the farther out you're grabbing onto that lever, the more leverage you're going to have, the less effort it's going to require to get the most power out of your brakes. Once I feel like I've got my brake lever in the right inboard position, I like to snug it down just slightly so that it doesn't move too much, but we're still going to be adjusting the lever angle, so I don't want to get it tight at this point. At this point, what I do is I'll grab a tape measure and just measure the gap between my grip and my brake lever, and then I'll duplicate it on the other side and then kind of snug that lever down too. Once I've got that sorted out, then I like to focus on the lever angle. And this is super important because it really dictates the position of your wrist. So if you typically have wrist pain, this is something you should pay attention to, because by adjusting your lever angle, a lot of times you can alleviate any kind of hand or wrist pain or numbness that you've maybe been experiencing. If your levers are angled too far down, you're going to feel like you're clinging on for dear life, trying not to slip off your handlebar. Now, on the opposite end of the spectrum, if your levers are angled too far up, you're going to feel like your wrists are really kinked, and you're probably going to experience some wrist or hand pain or numbness from this kind of a position. So what I like to do is sit on my bike, move those levers around until I feel like they're pretty comfy. And once I get one feeling just right, I'll snug it up, and then I'll take out my iPhone and get the measuring tool, which has a level included in it. Throw that on your grip and the end of your lever, or find a good spot that you can duplicate from one side to the other, and then measure that angle and make sure your bike is nice and vertical when you do this. Find out what that angle is, and then flip it over to the other side and do the exact same thing. That way both levers are going to be nearly identical position. Lastly is the reach and contact point of your brake levers. And not every brake lever will have these adjustments, but most modern brake levers will at least have a reach adjustment. And this is important because it dictates how far out your brake lever is from your handlebar. And if you have smaller hands, you're going to want to bring that reach in a bit. And if you have really big hands, you might want to move it out a ways. So if you haven't adjusted this, look on your brake levers. A lot of times there's a little dial, or sometimes it's just a little Allen bolt. And you can't really screw this up. A lot of times they have a hard stop at the end of that adjustment range. So try adjusting these and just feeling what feels right for your hands. Then I move on to contact point, which is where your brake pads actually engage. Not all brakes will have this adjustment, but if yours do, it's a pretty simple adjustment as well. You just spin a dial on SRAM brakes. Your finger's strongest at a 90-degree angle, so I like to have mine hit a little bit out from that so that when I squeeze really hard, I'm really at that 90-degree angle. That's when I'm at my absolute, panic braking point, and I have tons of power in my finger if needed. So once I've got the brake levers fully set up on my handlebars, that's when I then go to the shifter and the dropper post levers and try to get those fine-tuned as well. Kind of like all of this, there's not really any one-size-fits-all way that it needs to be set up. It's a little bit of a personal preference thing, but for me, I like to make sure that I can reach my dropper post lever as well as my shift levers when I'm out of the seat. Whether I'm descending or if I'm standing up climbing, I want to make sure I can reach those things pretty comfortably. It seems like no matter where you position these levers, you're going to be able to reach them when you're seated on your bike, but when you stand up, that's when you run into issues with reaching your shift levers and sometimes even your dropper post lever. So I like to make sure I can reach those when I'm standing up out of the saddle. Lastly, since we're talking about cockpit and handlebar setup, it's important to talk about grips. And there are thousands of different grip designs out there in the world, and there's different diameters and different designs and different patterns, and all these things have an impact on how they feel in your hands. So the best advice I can give you, if you're not sure if your grips are very comfy or if they feel like they're not the best grips, is go out to your local bike shop and just put your hands on a bunch of different grips and see what feels good for you. If you're still running the grips that came on your bike and they're the house brand grips, meaning you bought a Giant and you have Giant brand grips on your bike, or you have a Trek and they're Trek brand grips, a lot of times those just don't have the design emphasis that a true dedicated grip brand has put into the design and development of those grips. So for 20 or 30 bucks, do yourself a favor, go to your local bike shop, put your hands on a bunch of different grips and see what feels good and fits good for your hands. I promise you, you're going to feel the difference versus those house brand grips that came on your bike. So give it a try. So those are the steps that I go through when I'm setting up the Cockpit on any new bike. Be sure to hit the like button down below if you found this useful. Subscribe to the channel for all of our future videos. We've got a ton of stuff coming up. See you at the next one. Peace!